please don't burn me, please don't cremate me, because there's nothing left. The heat has already killed me, it has gone to my bones. But when I am dead, please make sure that you take me back to my village, where I had a stream flowing next to my house and where I had friends. But when you start digging the land in my native village, you'll find that I would be eternally at peace with myself in my own village.
Want to go back with the freedom that my mother, wears a bindi and roams freely in Srinagar.
Kashmiri Pandits have turned a leaf because, we dress like, my wife dresses like you dress.
Even if I am in Delhi, I am a Delhi wala, but I am a Kashmiri Dilli wala.
They consider themselves refugees in their own country, forced out from their sprawling homes in the middle of paradise.
This is a house.
Every 6 years, over 60,000 Kashmiri Pandit families become part of a national discourse. Every time, Jammu and Kashmir goes to polls.
चुनाव के बारे में ये पहले हमने नेशनल का भरोसा किया है। दूसरी बात, जब कांग्रेस पर भरोसा किया, डाला कांग्रेस को वोट, वो भी वैसे निकला है। फिर पीडीपी को, वो भी वैसे निकला। इस दौरान मोदी साहब के इंतजार में हैं, क्या वो क्या हमारे साथ बर्ताव करेगा।
There are reasons why many pundits are calling it the last chance. A natural right-wing party now rules at the center. The militancy in Kashmir is going through one of its most extended lull periods, and the BJP has stirred the election pot by staking their winning reputation in 2014, even on the state of Jammu and Kashmir.
I have never seen it at least in my 25 years of exile. I have never seen this kind of, campaigning happening, people calling each other and people discussing it. To my own, where I stay in my own society, we had people who came to us and gave us registration forms. But yeah, the proof of pudding is in eating, so we'll have to wait. I think.
It is perhaps this energy which has led to Election Commission data reflecting a nearly 27% rise in the number of voters in the last 6 years and an additional 4% rise in Kashmiri Pandit voters since the Lok Sabha elections of 2014. But Dr. Agni Shekhar, a noted writer and poet from Jammu, believes that Kashmiri Pandits are confused.
I think Kashmiri Pandit electorate is a bit confused, is on the horns of dilemma, as no political party has come out openly with their vision with regard to our geopolitical rehabilitation in Kashmir.
Rahul Pandita, noted author and journalist based in Delhi, echoes the very same view.
For electoral gains, we're getting a lot of confused signal. Mr. Modi meeting with Mr. Sajjad Lone very recently. So we do not know.
The sense of confusion is coupled with a deep sense of disillusionment. Sushil Pandit, an ad man who lives in Delhi, would tread with caution because democracy has failed the Pandits too many times before.
This is the 7th exodus of Kashmiri Pandits in the last 550 years. The earlier 6 exoduses happened when we were under an alien rule, when we were under a hostile rule, when there were no constitutional guarantees, when we were not living in a democracy. This exodus has happened under a secular democratic constitution. It is a test case for this democracy.
For Sushil, the memory of his aunt arriving with a few-month-old baby on the midnight of 19th January 1990 is a memory no election can wipe out.
My aunt, with a few months-old daughter in her arms, landing at our door in the middle of the night, and this was January winter night, and not being able to tell what happened, just crying incessantly.
It was our personal crystal nacht, if you know what I mean.
You know, slogans were raised from mosque. Slogans like "Hum kya chahte hain azadi."
I guess Panni Pakistan Battauruste Batnevsan, which means we want Pakistan here without Kashmiri Pandit men but with their women.
Scares you. You know, if I think about it right now, it still sends a shiver down my spine.
In 1989-90, more than 700 of us were brutally killed on the streets of Kashmir.
This whole environment had changed. There was this frenzy called Azadi.
My community has lived with a fear where they didn't know that who is going to murder them first, their neighbors or a terrorist.
There's a man who was killed while he was hiding in a rice drum, and his wife forced to eat the blood-soaked rice.
मेरी माँ भी गुजर गई बेचारी उसी वजह से.
You would never want to live in an environment where you couldn't trust people, you know, who will come and murder you or who will come and rape your women. I think they are the reasons why we left.
They wanted us to leave. We left. After this also the mad frenzy did not stop. It carried on, and I have seen such scenes with my eyes of temples.
लेकिन हिंदुस्तान का नारा देके हिंदुस्तान का झंडा चढ़ा दे हमने कश्मीर छोड़ना पड़ा, हमने अपना घर छोड़ना पड़ा, हमने अपनी प्रॉपर्टी छोड़ी, हमने अपना कैरियर छोड़ा, हमने अपना सब कुछ दांव पर लगा दिया और बेइज्जती हमारी हो गई देश में भीख मांग मांग के.
They never we never lived like people of Jammu and Kashmir. We were always looked at people from Kashmir. तुमको भगा दिया गया है कश्मीर से. This would be their first statement for us.
पहले कैंपों में रहते थे, तंबू में. अब फिर हम एक साल वहाँ दूसरे में, यहाँ भी 3 माइग्रेशन हो गए हमें. 3 बार हमने डेरा उठाया. यहाँ लाते हैं सामान, यहाँ बेचते हैं, दूसरी जगह जाना है, वहाँ जाते हैं खाली.
जो ब्यूरोक्रेसी हमारे देश की है उन्होंने हमको जुल्म की चक्की में डाल दिया.
10,000 Kashmiri Pandit houses have been burnt. I do not understand why, really. Almost 450 temples desecrated. I do not understand why. Because we had left.
हमें पता था 1 महीने या 2 महीने के बाद हम वापस आएंगे. ऐसे होकर 25 साल हो गए.
It was in 1990 that the frenzy of Azadi gripped the Kashmir Valley. Pandit men, women and children were driven out of their homes. Some made it alive and some were extinguished in the flames of their own belongings. But the 25 years after 1990, Kashmiri Pandits are insecure of losing their identity. Arup was a 3-year-old girl when her family fled the valley. Today in Delhi, she has brought Kashmir home. Her business is dealing in Kashmiri handicraft.
I have a connection with Kashmir. No matter where I am, I'm still a Kashmiri, you know. So that is an integral part of my identity. Yeah, now that you're telling me and I think through, so I think this is that unconscious effort of holding on to your roots.
Anupam Kher, Bollywood's premier actor, never lived in Kashmir but has shared the pain of his family, which got uprooted.
I was not part of it, maybe physically, but emotionally, mentally, I know everything that happened. My mama, mami had collected their earnings for 25-30 years just because they wanted to build a house in Kashmir of their own, in Srinagar. And they had just built a house in Kashmir and this whole thing started. And they started getting these threatening calls till one day they put the head of the neighbor's guy in their courtyard. And they said, leave, otherwise we will kill you. Your head will be somewhere else. So in a small Fiat car, whatever they could put, they just left the same evening. So it's a kind of an exodus. It's a kind of a, forget about mental torture, fear, but the physicality of getting uprooted from your own home in your own country is very, very tragic.
For Sushil Pandit, besides business, he found solace in Prasnat, his mission to keep the Kashmiri identity alive.
Prasnat is a word in Kashmiri. It is called identity. It's being erased. The identity is being changed and we are not there anymore to even protest it.
Rashnik, meanwhile, is unsure if his wife and daughter will be able to fit into what he calls a radicalized Kashmir.
Today, Valley's problem is not so much of separatism, but of radicalization. So, Kashmiri Pandits have turned a leaf because, we dress like, my wife dresses like you dress.
The issue of going back, therefore, is not just an emotive issue. It's not just about emotions, but it's also about politics. It's about promises made and promises forgotten. But most importantly, the issue of going back is about first finding some kind of closure to what has been a very dark past. The question Pandits living in Delhi often ask themselves is, will they be willing to go back without justice?
Are the Kashmiri Pandits willing to return without getting an iota of justice, without getting any semblance of justice? After all, in 1989-90, more than 700 of them were brutally killed.
While for Rahul it is about justice, for others who've settled in Delhi it is about freedom. It is about being able to walk freely on the streets of Srinagar without fear. It is about their identity.
I think if it's talk about going back, even if the government is fulfilling our demands, it's not like we'll pack our bags and go back. We want to go back to Kashmir as Kashmiri Pandits. We want to go back as Hindus. We want to go back as Indians. And we want to go back with the freedom that my mother, wears a bindi and roams freely in Srinagar.
While wearing a bindi and roaming freely on the streets of Srinagar may still be a distant dream for many Kashmiri Pandits, there is a renewed attempt to reach out to the Pandit voter, inside and outside the state of Jammu and Kashmir. In the event of a low voter turnout, political experts believe that Pandits could make a larger electoral point than before.
So there is a renewed sense of hope. I'm optimistic, but I'm very cautiously optimistic because we have seen, and I have seen it, I have been an observer ever since I was maybe 10. I have been an observer of politics, especially in Kashmir. And I have seen this many times that there have been many false dawns in Kashmir.
On the other side of a break, we take you to Jammu and Kashmir to meet those people, those migrant Kashmiri Pandits who are directly affected by the politics of Jammu and Kashmir. We take you to Jammu, where the notions of liberty, identity and freedom are perhaps more romantic notions, because the issues of daily livelihood and the lack of basic amenities still dominate their lives. 620 odd kilometers from New Delhi, in the land of elections, Jammu. Those languishing in refugee camps and makeshift homes for the past 25 years have a different story from the Kashmiri Pandits living in Delhi. 20 kilometers away from Jammu is the Jagti Rehabilitation and Resettlement Colony, which houses the largest number of exiled Kashmiri Pandits. They were pushed out of their homes, thrown out of the valley in 1989 and 1990, but it was only in 2011 that they found homes here in Jagti. 4,000 exiled Kashmiri Pandit families, over 20,000 people. What do they make of this election? Has there been a renewed attempt to reach out to them? Is there a renewed sense of hope? Or have 25 winters perhaps been too long and too cold to cloud every ray of hope? We find out. Jagti only came into being in 2011. These already run-down buildings now home to those Kashmiri Pandits who once lived in palatial homes in paradise. Deshratan, a resident of Jagti, is disgruntled by his past, says those in Delhi moved on while those in Jammu got left behind.
कश्मीर में दो समुदाय के लोग रहते थे। एक वो जो श्रीनगर सिटी में रहते थे, जो हाईफाई लोग थे। दूसरे थे जो डिफरेंट ब्लॉकों में, गांव में, जो विलेजर्स थे, जिनकी खेती बाड़ी उनकी जो पेशा था। और जो हाईफाई लोग थे, जिनके पास पैसा था, जो नौकरी करते थे गवर्नमेंट जॉब में, वो दिल्ली चले गए। अपने अप्रोच के नाम पर अपने बच्चों को नौकरी लगा दिया, जॉब बिजनेस कर दिया, वो सेटल हो गए। तो हम यहाँ पर रह गए, हमें किसने पूछा नहीं।
The question of going back only evokes anger among the people who live in Jagti. The angry retort is, what will we go back to?
अगर जाएंगे तो उधर किस जगह पर रहेंगे?
हमारे जो गाँव है, जो घर थे, वो सब के सब जला कर राख कर दिए गए। वहाँ बंजर है, जो हमारी ज़मीन है, उन पर नाजायज़ कब्जे के मंदिर जलाए गए हैं।
Sitting in his house in Mumbai, actor Kher says he can sense the pain and angst of those who lived in camps.
For a long time, the government did not pay any attention to any of the problems of Kashmiri Pandits because it was a botheration, it was a problem. How can you rehabilitate the people where the fear is unknown and the people who have lived with the fear? How can you sort of तालाब में आपको पता है कि मगरमच्छ हैं, 10 मगरमच्छ हैं, आप वहाँ से बड़ी मुश्किल से निकल कर आए हैं, आपको कहेंगे नहीं आप सब रहे हैं, हमने मगरमच्छ को समझा दिया है कि कुछ ना करना. So it's not possible. I think people who lived in tents in Jammu or in Delhi, they went through horrible times because these people who were never exposed to heat, to the hot weather, were suddenly dying of heat, of snake bites, of scorpio bites. Either they could exist or live, or they could fight.
ड्यूटी पे वोत ना घर अस नश तनखाह वाते रोटुक बिचौर तो यह सा यह वाते तुलुक कार मज सुनुक सोपोर टुल बल मारित पे दिजुक पे दरियावस रोम लाशी दिजुक बह गसी न पनी जाए क्या गस मे पे त्राट पत क्या गस पनी जाए हेक न बह
Life in Jagti is tough, and any reminiscing of the past is taken over by a strong sense of alienation, a sense of alienation that the Pandits are reminded of election after election.
Process of voting for a Kashmiri Pandit, a common Kashmiri, is very difficult. It has many hurdles and impediments. You know, we have that M form. We are not as free as any other citizen of the country so that we go and vote. I have to go, I have to fill up an M form. Then that M form has to be signed by a gazetted officer. Then it has to go to the election commission, election authorities. Then my vote gets registered.
पिछले पार्लियामेंट में भी लोगों ने वोट डाले थे, उससे पहले लोग कम डालते थे क्योंकि इंटरेस्ट नहीं था. मोदी के आने से वोट परसेंटेज बढ़ गया है और जो नए लोगों को वोट आया उनको भी बढ़ा है. लेकिन इसमें हमारी मुसीबत है वो M फॉर्म है.
Maybe the larger tragedy has been that the plight of exiled Kashmiri Pandits over the past 25 years has been treated as that of a vote bank, a numerically insignificant vote bank that is scattered and therefore cannot determine political fortunes, it cannot alter political trajectories in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. They may be exiled, they may be scattered and they may be numerically insignificant, but it is important to remember that they are people of the land of Jammu and Kashmir and they are an electorate, lest we forget.
There is no room for nostalgia, only irony. The rundown, dilapidated settlements like Jagti is ironically so similar to the bare ruins of the homes they once had.
यहाँ वोट बैंक का मसला हमारे देश जो है ये राजनीति से जात पात के राजनीति से उस कारण से हमारी एक छोटी सी कम्युनिटी है शायद इन राजनीतिक पार्टियों को हमारा फ़ायदा नहीं है वोट बैंक का इसलिए हमारा नाम नहीं ले रहे नहीं तो हम 3 साल है अभी आप देखिए मैडम जी हमारी बिल्डिंग 168 ब्लॉक नंबर है छत हम 3री मंजिल पर रह रहे हैं छत से पानी टपक रहा है कोई कुछ नहीं है अस्पताल तो बनाया है ऐसा है जैसे वो मुर्दा लाश घर के लिए लास्ट में जो हड्डियां नहीं जानवरों की रखते हैं ऐसे हड्डियों वाला ढांचा वहाँ है उस अस्पताल के आप देखो ढांचा जैसे हड्डियों का लगता है 4 साल से एक भी काम नहीं उधर हो रहा है
नहीं हम बस
Pinky Razdan holds a grudge against the administration. She says so much was done for flood relief in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. What about the calamity that struck the Pandits 25 years ago?
25 साल पहले जब हम कश्मीर से निकले वो तो सबसे बड़ा सैलाब था हम घर छोड़कर आ गए सारा प्रॉपर्टी छोड़कर आ गए गाय छोड़कर सब कुछ छोड़कर आ गए वो भी एक सैलाब था अब इनको भगवान ने हमें तो उन्होंने सैलाब लाया है इनको तो खुदा ने सैलाब लाया है तो हमारे बारे में किसी ने कुछ नहीं किया है इतना जितना आज उनके बारे में करते हैं
Their homes plundered, entire villages burnt down, people cut into pieces, and 25 years later, closure is still a distant dream. that Pandit still wants to vote. The 4% rise in Pandit voters since the Lok Sabha election is testimony to that. But Kashmiri Pandits constitute 1.6% of the electorate of Jammu and Kashmir. A 1.6% that is too small to hand in a victory to those in battleground Jammu and Kashmir. But will this election be that tipping point that the Pandits have waited for 25 very long years?
लहरों से डरकर नौका पार नहीं होती, हिम्मत करने वालों की हार नहीं होती। नन्ही चींटी जब दाना लेकर चलती है, चढ़ती दीवारों पर 100 बार फिसलती है। मन का विश्वास रगों में साहस भरता है, चढ़कर गिरना, गिरकर चढ़ना ना अखरता है। आखिर उसकी मेहनत बेकार नहीं होती, हिम्मत करने वालों की हार नहीं होती।